And then, there it was, the strangest stipulation I'd ever seen on a real estate listing. The previous occupant will continue to live on the top floor. He will never be evicted and never be charged rent. His room must never be entered, and under no circumstances should he ever be spoken to. Failure to comply with these terms will result in immediate violation of the sales contract, and the inhabitants will be held liable. It's a joke, it has to be. My wife laughed nervously after I read the fine print aloud. We weren't even seriously considering it. We couldn't afford this place, not in our wildest dreams. But something pulled at me. I just wanted a peek, a quick look at the house everyone in the neighborhood whispered about. The past month had been a blur of open houses, each one blending into the next, gray walls, gray floors, gray everything. But this place was different. It was a mansion, way out of our league. Yet the real estate agent assured us it was within our budget. How? What's the deal with the tenant upstairs? I asked the listing broker, a sweaty, bear-like man with beady eyes. He barely blinked. "Oh, you won't even notice him," he replied with an unnervingly wide grin. "He keeps to himself. If you're concerned about space, don't be. There are 2 gorgeous full-size bedrooms downstairs, perfect for your daughter. And wouldn't she love that? Her own room to play in, loud music and all." The giant man crouched down to address Neela, our 11-year-old. "Wouldn't you like that, sweetie?" Neela just shrugged, gliding across the polished hardwood floors in her socks. "I like it here," she murmured, her voice distant, almost hollow. "Have you seen this kitchen?" My wife called from the next room. "Brand new appliances. It's even got a built-in espresso machine." I felt my controls slipping, like sand through my fingers. "But the old man upstairs, it's strange, right?" The agent shrugged, eyes gleaming. "What would bother me is knowing I could have given my family the house of their dreams, but didn't. Just because of some old man I'd never have to deal with. He's ancient, you know. Probably won't be around much longer anyway. Then all that space is yours." That oily grin again. We took the deal. The price was too good to pass up. Within a month, we'd moved in. At first, it was surreal how easy it was to forget about the tenant. Mayako, they called him. We never saw him, not once. He had his own bathroom, his own space. Every week, groceries would be left at the top of the stairs, eggs, milk, meat, just sitting there, untouched, until the next morning when they'd vanish. Sometimes at night, we'd hear shuffling sounds from above, or a crackling old radio playing songs from a forgotten era. But mostly, nothing. It was like he didn't exist. Until that one night. It was just after 11 p.m., the house swallowed by darkness when I heard it, muffled sobbing. It echoed faintly, a wretched sound that seeped through the walls like something buried, but not quite dead. The sobs grew louder, dragging on, as though the air itself was crying. And then, for the first time since we moved in, I wondered if Mayako had ever really been alive at all. My first instinct was to check on Neela. She was sitting upright in her bed, eyes wide, clutching her blanket tightly. "You heard it too?" she asked, her voice barely a whisper. "Yeah, but it's nothing," I lied, trying to sound calm. "Just go back to sleep. Why is Mayako crying?" she asked, glancing nervously at the ceiling. "I don't know," I muttered, forcing a smile. "But it's none of our business. We promised not to disturb him, remember? Can you promise that too, Neela?" She nodded, her eyes still fixed upward, as if she could see through the ceiling to whatever was making those sounds. I turned on some soft music to drown out the noise, but the eerie sobs seemed to weave through the melody. When I returned to our bedroom, my wife was gone. I called her name, checked the bathroom empty. Panic began to gnaw at me, irrational fears of her being dragged away by some grotesque creature lurking in the shadows. That's when I heard her voice on the stairs. "I'm sorry to bother you, Mayako. Is everything all right?" she called softly. I bolted up the steps, heart hammering in my chest. Neela had crept out of her room too, standing beside me, eyes wide with fear. We watched in horror as my wife raised her hand and knocked on his door. The forbidden's door. "Stop that! Come back to bed!" I hissed, but my voice came out in a hoarse whisper, panic constricting my throat. "He might need our help," she insisted, knocking again. The door creaked open just a crack not wide enough to see inside, but enough for something to peer out. A voice, low and guttural, growled from the darkness. "This will be your only warning." The sound sent ice through my veins. My wife stepped back, startled, as if some primal part of her recognized the danger. "I was just worried that," she began, but the voice cut her off. "Whatever you see, whatever you hear, whatever you think might be going on up here, it'll be the death of you." The door snapped shut with an unnatural finality. I wasted no time, grabbing my wife's arm and steering her and Neela back to bed. But after that night, the crying never really stopped. For 2 weeks, the house echoed with his whimpering, his low, pitiful moans. Sometimes, it sounded like he was battling some unseen illness. Other times, it seemed like his ancient body was finally giving out. There were even faint, desperate calls for help. But I reminded my family, we promised. At first, they argued, but over time, we adapted. We kept music playing all day, every day, until the sobs and moans blended into the background like static. That was until it got worse. The sounds became more violent. Deep, guttural grunts, agonized wails, and eventually, blood-curdling screams, feral, almost inhuman, like an animal caught in the final throes of death. It was late one night, after Neela had gone to bed, when the screaming hit a fever pitch. My wife leapt from the bed in an instant, running for the door. I grabbed her, pinning her arms, forcing her back. "He's in pain. We can't just leave him like that." She cried, her voice cracking with panic. "But you heard him," I whispered fiercely. "It's his right to be left alone." "What about 911? She shot back. "Even if he doesn't want our help, they could at least try to save his life. Maybe." I paused, swallowing the lump in my throat. "Maybe he doesn't want to be saved." She stopped struggling, eyes wide, her breath coming in short gasps. I guided her back to bed, gently stroking her shoulders, trying to calm her. "Maybe," I whispered, "it's just his time, and maybe it's what's best. For all of us. For all of us?" Her voice was sharp now, suspicion crawling into her tone. Before I could react, she was on her feet again, glaring at me with a strange intensity. "You want him to die, don't you?" she hissed. "A living, breathing person, and you want him dead just so we can have more space." "That's not what I meant." I stammered, trying to keep my voice steady. "Listen to him, he's in agony. But we can't." We both fell silent at the sound of knocking. 1, 2, 3. Slow, deliberate knocks. Quiet, but insistent. They were coming from inside Mayako's room. "Hello, Mr. Malcolm." My wife and I exchanged a panicked glance as a door swung open somewhere above us. "Get out. Get out, you stupid girl. Nyla, no." I shouted, bursting out of the bedroom and racing up the stairs, just in time to see my daughter vanish behind the closing door. It slammed shut, echoing through the house like a tomb ceiling. My wife was right behind me as we reached the door, breathless, hearts pounding. A cold, metallic rattle echoed from the other side, followed by the ominous slide of a bolt locking into place. "Mayako!" "Open the door," I yelled, pounding on it. "We're here to help." "Go away." Mayako's voice growled from within, his tone filled with something beyond anger, pure malice. "I warned you, didn't I? I warned you both. She's mine now. Nyla, can you hear me?" My wife screamed, frantic. "What's going on in there?" There was a pause, then Nyla's voice came back, muffled and distant, like she was speaking from the bottom of a well. "I don't know, it's weird in here," she said. Her words reverberated eerily, like they were bouncing off invisible walls. "Is he trying to stop you from leaving? Is Mayako in there?" I asked, my pulse pounding in my ears as I strained to hear her response. Another long silence, my breath caught in my throat. "No," Nyla finally replied. "There isn't anyone here." I exhaled sharply, but the relief was short-lived. My wife and I exchanged another glance, her face pale, her eyes wide with fear. She crouched down, pressing her ear to the crack under the door. "Can you unlock the door, sweetie?" she asked gently, her voice trembling. "Can you come back out?" There was another long pause, too long, before Neela's voice came again, quieter this time. "I'll be right there." But something was wrong. Something in her tone sent shivers crawling down my spine. "Nyla, open the door," my wife insisted, rattling the handle. "Come out, please." "Don't come in," Nyla's voice wavered, almost pleading. "You won't like it." That was the breaking point. I couldn't take it anymore. I threw my weight against the door, slamming my shoulder into it. The frame rattled and creaked, dust sifting down from the ceiling. My wife joined me, both of us crashing into the door, desperate to break it open. From the other side, Nyla's voice dissolved into hysterical whimpers, a frantic mix of sobs and noises that weren't quite words. The sound of her crying fed my own rising terror, fueling our efforts to break through. We slammed into the door again and again until, finally, the hinges buckled. The door flew open. A brilliant, blinding light flooded the room, so bright and disorienting that it made me stagger backward. Mirrors, everywhere. A whole world of mirrors stretched endlessly before us, reflecting light in every direction. Hillsides were carved into jagged, thousand-faced peaks of shimmering glass, and trees erupted from the ground, their surfaces polished like crystal, splitting the light into 1,000 fractals. The sky above wasn't a sky at all, it was an endless vault of reflections. The clouds smooth and glassy, multiplying endlessly as far as the eye could see. But the worst part wasn't the infinite reflections of the world, it was the faces. Faces in every mirror, staring back at me from countless angles, none of them my own. Old men, young men, women, children all, gazing at me with hollow eyes, moving in perfect sync with my gestures, but not mine. Their expressions twisted in silent agony, their eyes red and swollen from untold sorrow, tears streaming down their faces, though their movements otherwise matched mine. That's when I realized Mayako hadn't been the one crying all this time. It was them, the figures in the mirrors. Their anguish, their silent screams, their endless tears. They had been trapped here, wailing in despair for God knows how long. "Where's Mayako?" my wife whispered, her voice trembling. Neela stood there, surrounded by the towering mirrors, her expression vacant. She shrugged. "There isn't anyone here." She was kneeling on the ground, making faces at an old woman staring back at her. The ancient face in the mirror twisted into grotesque sneers, almost comically exaggerated. But the sight was far from funny, it felt wrong. Deeply wrong, like something you shouldn't see. My daughter's reflection mirrored hers in a hideous parody, and the old woman seemed to grin back, her eyes dead and hollow. "We need to get out of here, now." My voice was sharp, but they weren't listening. My wife was turning in slow, dazed circles, utterly entranced by the sea of reflections. Her every movement mimicked by endless distorted arms and bodies stretching across the mirrored expanse. They followed her every move, each one just slightly off, as if mocking her from another world. "How does it do that?" she asked, almost dreamlike. "Is this a screen? Are they plugged in somewhere?" I felt a cold dread claw at my insides. If Mayako isn't here, then who locked the door after Neela? My question finally snapped them out of their trance. A sudden click echoed through the room, the rattle of a chain, and the sound of the door locking once more behind us. "She's all mine now. You're all mine." It was Mayako's voice, but it was coming from nowhere and everywhere at once. I searched for its source, but the mirrors only reflected my panic, multiplying my desperation. I ran towards the door, only to slam into something solid, an invisible wall of glass. My wife and daughter were trapped too, frantically pounding at the air around them. But it wasn't air. They were trapped inside their reflections, just like me. 2 weeks, came the voice again, low and echoing. 2 weeks is a long time to listen to someone suffer. But you told us not to help you. I protested, my voice cracking. I've listened to them for years, Mayako's voice replied, filled with a venomous satisfaction. I turned, and there he was standing by the door, a hunched, twisted figure. His body was impossibly contorted, barely more than a few feet tall, his spine arching grotesquely so that his head dipped far lower than his crooked shoulders. Deep within the folds of darkness that swallowed his form, 2 glowing red eyes gleamed, watching me with an intensity that made my blood freeze. "They never stop, you know," he rasped, his voice dripping with malice. "You'd think, after all this time, they would have given up on giving up, but they never do. What is this place?" "Who are you?" I demanded, my voice trembling. His eyes blinked, slow and deliberate, like a predator watching prey. "This is your home, your true home. No matter how comfortable you make yourself out there, no matter how loud you turn up the music, or how hard you pretend, you'll always be a visitor. And wherever you go, whoever you love, it will only last until you come home to me again." Neela was sobbing softly, but I couldn't look at her. I didn't dare break my gaze from the creature. My wife, I didn't know where she was anymore. The figure, Mayako, felt so real, so present, the only real thing in this endless mirrors. "I don't want to be here. Let us out." "Please," I begged. "We'll never bother you again, I swear." "Never?" The creature chuckled, a horrible sound, like glass grinding together. "Don't lie to me." He was closer now, standing right on the other side of the invisible barrier. His claw-like hand lifted, and to my horror, my own hand mirrored the movement, inching toward his without my control. My fingertip brushed against his, and the glass that had held us shattered in an ear-splitting explosion of light and sound. Everything fell away. The mirrors, the impossible reflections, the endless labyrinth, it all crumbled into nothing. I found myself standing in an empty room, my fingers still pressed against the cold back of a mirror frame. Shards of broken glass littered the ground around us. My wife and daughter stood beside me, disoriented, but alive. Without a word, I guided them out, carefully picking our way through the carpet of glass, and closed the door firmly behind us. Every week, the groceries still appear at the top of the stairs, untouched for a day before vanishing. And sometimes, there's laughter mingled with the distant sobs. My family and I don't talk about what happened up there. No one suggested we take a second trip. I think death is the stranger living upstairs, but maybe that's true for everyone. At least ours is close enough to keep an eye on.